I heard them dividing my money while I pretended to sleep. That was the first truth of that night. Sharp, humiliating, and as cold as the draft crawling under my living room door. At 78, people assume you sleep heavily. They assume your mind dulls, your senses fade, your awareness drifts into some soft cotton haze. Mine never did. If anything, age only sharpened my hearing, especially when it came to the voices of my own children. I lay still in my armchair, the old quilt drawn over me, my breathing slow and even. The lamp was off, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. And then I heard the key turning. Not knocking, not calling out, just letting themselves in. Daniel first. Then Courtney's hurried whisper behind him. Their footsteps hesitated as if making sure I was truly asleep. I felt, rather than saw, the moment they realized I wasn't in my bedroom. A pause. Then a sigh of relief. "She's out," Daniel whispered. "Good. Let's do this fast." Out, as if I were an appliance. My hand moved slowly under the quilt until I found the little recorder Jacob had given me last week. "For capturing old memories, Grandma." I pressed the button and kept my fingers on it, steady as a surgeon. The red light glowed faintly under the fabric. Courtney opened a drawer, the one where I keep my insurance papers. "She won't understand any of this," she murmured. "Helen barely remembers to lock her doors." Helen, not Mom, not even Mother. I felt my jaw tense, but my breath remained slow. "It's better this way," Daniel said, his voice quiet but firm. "We'll get her to sign the new forms tomorrow. She won't read them. She never does. And once the house is in both our names, the rest will follow." A shuffle of papers. My papers. Courtney laughed softly. "God, imagine if she knew how much she actually has. She sits in this old chair eating soup, while half of this could buy us a second home." Half. A second home. Their shadows moved across the carpet, crossing in front of me. They never once looked down. They never imagined I was awake. Why would they? In their minds, I had been fading for years, smaller, slower, easier to bend. "She'll sign," Daniel repeated. "She always signs. And when the time comes, we'll handle the rest. It's not like Jacob will question anything." My throat tightened. Not from tears, but from something older and harder. The way betrayal fossilizes inside you. But I stayed motionless, my breath soft and steady, my recorder glowing under the quilt, catching every careless syllable. Then Courtney said something that sliced deeper than the rest. "She's lived long enough. She won't need all that money much longer." They went on, calculating, dividing, predicting my decline like it was scheduled on a calendar. I heard the zipper of my document pouch, the rustle of envelopes, the clink of my safe keys being tried one by one. I listened to my own children plan my disappearance from my own life. When they finally left, the house did not return to silence. It pulsed with a new awareness, an old woman awakening not from sleep, but from delusion. I opened my eyes in the dark and looked around my little room, its wrinkles and wear so much like my own. My hand closed around the recorder. For the first time in years, I did not feel fragile. I felt awake. Morning always tells the truth more plainly than night does. It doesn't whisper or hide behind shadows. It just stands in the doorway, pale and honest, waiting for you to face what you already know. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was stiffness in my neck from sleeping in the armchair. The second, a quiet heaviness beneath my ribs. Not fear, not sorrow, something flatter, colder, recognition. I folded the quilt carefully, the way I've done for 30 years, smoothing the worn corners. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. They tremble when I read fine print or button a blouse, but not now. Not after hearing my own children divide my life like leftover cake. The kitchen was chilly, so I turned on the kettle and stood near it, letting the rising steam warm my face. My house has always been small, but in the morning light, it looked different, more fragile, as if it too had heard the voices slipping across the carpet in the dark. My husband used to say a home absorbs everything: love, arguments, secrets, hopes. Apparently, it absorbs betrayal as well. I made tea and sat at the small oak table. My mind didn't wander the way people expect an old woman's mind to wander. It went straight to the night before, dissecting each word as cleanly as a scalpel. She won't understand any of this. She always signs. She won't need the money much longer. How easily they said it. How natural it was for them to plan around my absence while I was still breathing. The clock on the wall clicked softly, steady as a heartbeat. I glanced at it only once. I had no schedule for today, no errands, no appointments. But somehow, the hours ahead felt different, shaped, purposeful, like a road quietly unfolding. I wasn't sure yet where it led, but I felt myself stepping toward it. I took out the recorder from the pocket of my robe, a small silver thing, warm from being held all night. I set it gently on the table. It looked harmless, laughably so, but inside it held my children's voices, their whispers, their certainty that I was too dim to notice anything at all. I didn't press play. Not yet. I didn't need to hear it again to know the truth. Just then, a knock sounded on the door. Light, quick, familiar. Only one person in my life knocks as if he's afraid he might disturb the dust. "Grandma?" Jacob called. "You up?" I opened the door, and there he stood. Tall, awkward in his college sweatshirt, hair uncombed, eyes bright with that earnest kindness young people don't even know they carry. He stepped inside and inhaled dramatically. "You made tea," he said. "Good, I didn't sleep much." That startled me. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Studying, and I kept thinking I should check on you today." My throat tightened, not from emotion, but from the strange gentleness of being considered. Daniel never stopped by without a reason. Laura never knocked softly. But Jacob came simply because he thought I might need him. Life isn't fair, but sometimes it hands you a single person who makes the unfairness bearable. We sat at the table. He talked about an exam he'd just passed, about a book he thought I'd like. I listened, smiling, my hands wrapped around my cup. I didn't tell him anything about last night. I couldn't. Not yet. He was too young to carry that weight, and besides, I needed my own thoughts to settle before I put them into anyone else's hands. Still, he noticed something. "You seem quieter today," he said softly. "Not in a bad way. Just different." I lifted my gaze to him. For a moment, I almost said everything. How his father and aunt had entered my home like thieves. How they had peeled away the last thin skin of trust I had left. How the recorder between us held the proof of it all. But instead, I touched his hand lightly. "Different can be good," I said. "Sometimes it means a person finally woke up." He nodded, not fully understanding, but willing to trust me anyway. That alone steadied me more than any long night's sleep could. After he left, the kettle whistled again, as if reminding me I'd forgotten to turn it off. I stood in the quiet kitchen and looked around my life. The photos on the wall, the chipped china, the curtains I'd sewn myself decades ago. Everything felt both familiar and newly precious. Last night had shaken me, yes, But it had also drawn a line I could no longer pretend wasn't there. The world had shifted, and I would have to shift with it. But not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, like the quiet settling of earth after an old river changes its course. I didn't press play on the recorder until late afternoon. Half the day passed with me drifting through my little house like someone listening for an echo, slowly, quietly, touching familiar things as if deciding whether they still belonged to me. The cup Jacob used sat in the sink, a faint ring of tea dried at the bottom. The chair where I'd slept still held the imprint of my body. The quilt lay neatly folded over the armrest. Nothing looked different, but everything felt altered. Finally, I sat down, placed the recorder on the table, and clicked the button. Their voices spilled out immediately, low, confident, unhurried. Daniel's calm tone, Courtney's pointed whispers. I had expected the recording to shake me, but listening to it was like watching a storm from behind a sturdy window. The fear wasn't in the sound. The fear had already lived in me for years, quiet and constant. What I heard now confirmed something I'd been refusing to name. They hadn't lost respect for me last night. They had long since lost it. I had simply overheard the moment the illusion finally collapsed. I let the recording play through once. Then again. On the third listen, I didn't hear the words anymore. I heard patterns. The familiarity in Daniel's tone when he said, "She always signs." The casual cruelty when Courtney laughed about my savings. The way neither of them hesitated. No guilt, no second thoughts. Just a plan. A plan they'd probably rehearsed. I turned the recorder off and set it aside. The quiet pressed in around me, thick as wool. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is sharp, bright, quick. What I felt was older and more settled. A kind of clarity. For years I'd believed I was being generous, helpful, supportive. A good mother, even if imperfect. When my son needed money for his business, I convinced myself it was natural to help him. When my daughter needed a short-term loan, I told myself it was family duty. When they came to me with papers, tax forms, insurance updates, refinancing documents, I signed because I trusted them. Or perhaps because trusting them was easier than imagining they could take advantage of me. But I also knew the truth, quietly, like a whisper under the floorboards. I'd known it long before last night. I just didn't want to look directly at it. Sometimes you love people so deeply, you refuse to see the shape of the knife in their hand, even as it glints right in front of you. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was calm. The kind of calm a long neighborhood acquires. Cars parked in the same places, lawns aging with their owners, the breeze turning leaves without urgency. I'd lived here 50 years. I'd carried groceries through that door with my husband's warm hand on my back. I'd watched my children run down that sidewalk with scraped knees. I'd baked pies, shelved school drawings, mended shirts. I had built a life of small, steady things. And last night revealed they saw none of it. They saw only the numbers attached to my name. The house felt too quiet, so I went to the bedroom and opened my closet. Among the old coats and scarves, tucked high on the shelf, was a metal box. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were bank statements, notes I'd written to myself about accounts, documents from my husband's file. I held them gently, as if touching something sacred. These papers represented decades of careful decisions. Savings scraped from small paychecks, investments my husband taught me to make, quiet sacrifices I never spoke about. My children knew pieces of this, but not the whole. They didn't know how much of myself had gone into preserving our home, our stability. They only saw what they expected to see: an old woman who could be guided, nudged, persuaded. I carried the box to the kitchen table, laid the papers out. For the first time in years, I examined every line, every number, every date. My husband used to say, "Money isn't about wealth, it's about control." Who holds it? Who depends on it? Who uses it as leverage? I realized, sitting there with the late sun creeping across my table, that I had given Daniel and Laura far more control than they ever earned. By evening, I put everything back in order and washed the teacup Jacob had used. His kindness lingered on the edge of my thoughts, a reminder that not all love turns selfish with age. I wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. But I wasn't afraid anymore either. I felt something steady settle into me, like a stone at the bottom of a river, unmoved by the current. They thought last night would be the beginning of my decline. They were wrong. It was the beginning of my awareness. People like to believe families fall apart in one dramatic moment: a shouted argument, a slammed door, a betrayal so loud the walls remember it. But in my experience, distance grows the way rust does, quietly, slowly. Then all at once you realize the foundation has thinned to paper. As I sat at the kitchen table the next morning, I let myself trace every step that had brought Daniel and Laura to that night. Their whispers over my sleeping body, their certainty that I existed only for their benefit. It didn't begin yesterday. It didn't even begin last year. The truth had been seeping in for decades. I thought first of Daniel because he was easier to understand. He'd been a serious, polite boy who adored his father. After my husband died, Daniel slipped into a role he didn't know how to fill: protector, decision-maker, the man of the family. But life has a way of twisting intentions. Responsibility turned into entitlement. Concern turned into control. Every time he told me, "Mom, I'll handle it," what he really meant was that I should step aside, trust his judgment, and stay quiet. And I did. For years. He'd come with documents too complicated for me, and I'd sign them because it felt like faith, not surrender. When he needed money for a business venture that failed after 6 months, I excused it. He's trying. When he snapped at me for buying a new heater without consulting him, I told myself he was stressed. When he began visiting only when something needed fixing, or when bills were tight, I convinced myself that adult children are simply busy, not drifting. Love can make a person blind longer than any illness. Laura was different, softer in voice, harder in her disappearances. My daughter held her resentment like a keepsake, never addressed, never explained, but always present. She blamed me for things I could never quite define. For working too much when she was a girl, for being too strict, for being too lenient, for having expectations, for having none. Every version changed depending on the season of her life. But she never forgot to say, "I'll pay you back, Mom," whenever she borrowed money. She just forgot the second half of that sentence afterward. Her visits were always framed as kindness, checking on me, bringing flowers she'd bought with my own loans. Yet her eyes always drifted toward the cabinets where I kept documents. She'd ask about my accounts with feigned casualness. "You should let me manage things. It's safer." Safe for whom, she never clarified. I let all of it happen. I let it because I remembered their small hands in mine, their scraped knees, the nights they cried over heartbreaks, the birthdays when they climbed into my lap to blow out candles. I let it because the alternative, admitting they no longer saw me, felt too brutal to bear. It's strange how a parent's memory clings to what was long after the children have left it behind. I looked around my kitchen then, its peeling paint, the old radio on the counter, the faded curtains I'd sewn before Laura was born, and wondered if these quiet rooms had noticed the shift before I had. Maybe the walls had heard their tone changing years before it reached my understanding. And yet, I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them harm. That would have been easier, perhaps. Hate offers direction, a target. What I felt instead was something heavier, the understanding that I had raised them with softness while forgetting to keep some of that softness for myself. People think old age weakens you, but I felt something strengthening in me. Something like a spine I had misplaced and finally rediscovered. Their betrayal wasn't new. It was simply undeniable now. I pushed the recorder aside and folded my hands in my lap. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could refuse to repeat it. And that, for a woman my age, is its own kind of beginning. Daniel came by the next afternoon, the way a person comes to check whether a fragile object has cracked. He didn't call first. He seldom did anymore. He used to ring the bell politely in his youth, waiting for my, "Come in, darling." Now he let himself inside with the brisk confidence of someone who believed the house and the woman in it were simply extensions of his authority. "Helen?" His voice reached the hallway before he did. "Mom, you up?" Mom. The word sounded strange today. Too familiar for a man who had spent last night dividing my future like property lines. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of mail I had already read twice. When Daniel walked in, he paused, studying my face with the practiced eye of someone searching for weakness. People talk about aging parents as if they are delicate china, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. But what they forget is that age teaches you how to survive cracks, not break under them. "You look tired," he said. "Rough night?" I lifted my eyes slowly, carefully. I slept, as I always do. A simple sentence, a true one, and he never imagined the depth beneath it. He sat across from me without waiting to be invited. He placed a thick envelope on the table, white, official-looking, too heavy with intent. I recognized the type. Insurance adjustment forms. Property updates. The kind he used to explain for me while sliding them under my pen. "Mom," he began gently, "there are some papers we need to go over. Nothing complicated, just routine updates." Routine. Yes, routine to him. Routine to the woman he imagined I still was. Compliant, trusting, unseeing. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them steady, not from fear, but from a rising steadiness that felt almost unfamiliar. "What kind of updates?" He gave a soft, dismissive smile. "Just some adjustments to make things smoother for you. Streamlined, you don't need to worry about the details." I held his gaze. "I like details, Daniel. They help me understand what I'm signing." The smile faltered. Not much, but enough. He cleared his throat, reached into the envelope, and pulled out a stack of papers clipped together. "These are for the homeowner's insurance, and these," he separated another set, "will ensure the house transitions properly. You know, when the time comes." There it was again. When the time comes. As if my expiration date were an item on his calendar. "Let me see them," I said calmly. He hesitated. Just half a second. But hesitation where there used to be confidence is a meaningful shift. He passed the papers to me, his fingers tapping against the table while I adjusted my glasses. I read every line, every word, every cleverly embedded clause. These weren't routine updates. They were structured transfers of authority, disguised under friendly legal phrasing. Subtle. Too subtle for someone who didn't read closely. But I read closely now. I set the papers down. This isn't insurance, Daniel. He blinked. What do you mean? This, I slid the stack back toward him, is a transfer of property rights. Partial now. Full later. Quietly phrased. Easily signed away. His face tightened, not with guilt, but with the irritation of someone whose plan was meeting unexpected resistance. Mom, he said, leaning forward, you're overthinking this. I'm trying to help you. These documents are to protect you. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The boy he once was drifted through my memory, the one who cried when his goldfish died, who held my hand crossing the street. But the man before me was different. Sharper. Certain he knew better. I appreciate your concern, I said softly, but I'll need time to review these. Carefully. Preferably with someone who can explain every line. His jaw clenched. A lawyer? Mom, that's unnecessary. To you, perhaps, I replied. Not to me. The silence between us thickened. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned. He wasn't accustomed to me requiring anything beyond his opinion. Finally, he gathered the papers with a stiff motion and shoved them back into the envelope. Fine, he said. Take your time, but don't make this harder than it needs to be. I smoothed the tablecloth with my palm. Hardness isn't always a choice, Daniel. Sometimes it arrives on its own. He looked at me then, not with tenderness, not with anger, but with calculation, measuring, evaluating, reconsidering his approach. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, standing. We'll finish this then. When the door closed behind him, the house exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. I sat alone at the table, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I only felt the certainty deepen inside me. Quiet, firm, immovable. They expected the same mother they'd always known. But that woman was gone. The next morning began with a decision I didn't announce to anyone, not even to myself out loud. I simply woke, washed my face, put on a clean sweater, and laid out every folder of documents I owned onto the kitchen table. Pages with faded ink, notarized forms from decades ago, bank statements my husband once organized with careful notes in the margins. I smoothed each sheet with the palm of my hand, feeling the weight of years layered between them. Not fear, not confusion, preparation. By 10 o'clock, I had dressed and locked the front door behind me. The walk to the bus stop was slow but steady. I held the rail firmly as I climbed aboard. The driver nodded at me with the polite warmth strangers often give to elderly women. If only he knew I wasn't fragile today. I was deliberate. The law office sat 2 blocks from the town library, in a modest clay brick building that looked more tired than old. I had been there only once since my husband died. The receptionist glanced up with a practiced smile. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, setting my purse gently on the counter. But I need one today. Perhaps it was the firmness in my tone. Perhaps it was the slight tremor of urgency beneath it. Whatever she saw, it made her expression soften. Let me check, she murmured, tapping at her keyboard. Mr. Bennett can meet with you in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Enough time to sit, to breathe, to remind myself I was not doing anything wrong. Protecting one's life isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. When I entered his office, Mr. Bennett rose from behind his desk. He'd aged since I last saw him, his once dark beard now mostly gray, glasses a little thicker, but his eyes remained sharp. Helen, he said kindly, it's been a long time. Yes, I replied, lowering myself into the chair, and I'm afraid I should have come sooner. He waited, not impatiently, attentively, That alone almost unraveled me. How strange it felt to be listened to. I reached carefully into my purse and took out the recorder. I set it on his desk between us. "I need to secure my home," I said quietly, "and my accounts, and I need to do it without my children being able to undo anything." He didn't ask why. He pressed play. The room filled with Daniel's voice first, calm, assured, entitled. Then Courtney's whisper, the rustle of papers, the stark certainty in their tone. I kept my eyes on my folded hands while Mr. Bennett listened, his expression tightening in places, his jaw shifting in others. When the recording ended, he exhaled slowly. "Helen," he said, choosing his words with the same care a surgeon chooses instruments, "you've brought me clear evidence of intent to manipulate your assets. You did the right thing coming here." "I should have come years ago," I murmured. He shook his head. "It's not too late. You're competent. You're in full control. And you have options." Options. The word settled into me like a warm stone. He explained carefully how we could revoke all informal permissions, remove shared access, create an irrevocable trust to protect the house and investments, assign a long-term agent of my choosing, and craft directives that could not be overridden without court intervention. Everything he said made sense. Everything sounded like a door I hadn't realized I could close until now. "I want Jacob to be the beneficiary," I said finally, "but not responsible for managing anything yet. He's too young." Mr. Bennett nodded. "We can structure it that way." "And I want Daniel and Laura removed from any authority." "That," he said calmly, "is absolutely your right." When I left the office, the air outside felt different, lighter somehow. The sun had come out from behind the clouds, shining faintly across the pavement. My steps were slow but steady as I walked back toward the bus stop. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was something I hadn't touched in years, my own power, returning quietly to my hands. The next day I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't excitement. Old women rarely reach for excitement. It was steadiness, the kind that comes when a long, slow pain finally earns a name and you decide to stop living under it. My breakfast was simple: toast, a boiled egg, tea. But even the act of eating felt different. Not rushed, not distracted. I wasn't wondering whether Daniel would stop by unannounced or whether Laura would call asking for a small favor. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for once, it had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. On the table lay the list Mr. Bennett had drafted for me. Clear steps, neatly numbered, written in a hand both firm and patient. I read them twice before I began. First, I called the bank. The customer service line was slow, but eventually a young man answered. His voice was polite, cheerful in the way people are when they're trained to be. When I explained that I wanted to revoke all shared access and automatic withdrawals, his tone shifted into something more serious. "Of course, Mrs. Marwick, we can initiate that immediately. You will need to sign updated forms, but I've placed a temporary lock on every external authorization." Temporary lock. Those two words alone felt like a door closing behind me. Quiet, final, merciful. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made the next call, to my investment office. Another round of verifications, security questions, identity checks. I answered each calmly, surprising even myself. By noon, every account I owned had been cordoned off, as if I'd drawn a protective circle around my financial life. The house was next. I gathered the property documents, deed, tax records, old correspondence with the insurance company. My hands moved with purpose, sorting, stacking, identifying what needed to be included in the trust. These papers had once intimidated me. Now they felt like tools. Tools I had simply forgotten I knew how to use. I paused to rest, sitting in my armchair with a glass of water. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains in pale strips. Dust motes drifted lazily, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place beneath them. For years, I had allowed myself to live gently, to avoid conflict, to maintain peace. But gentleness is not the same as helplessness, and peace built on silence is not peace at all. By 3 o'clock, everything was gathered. I placed each stack into a folder, labeled, clipped, orderly. Then I walked to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept the emergency envelope my husband and I had created decades ago. Inside were the original versions of our will, photographs, and a note he'd written in his cramped handwriting. Don't let worry make your decisions for you. Let clarity do it instead. I touched the paper lightly. His absence still stung, but today it felt less lonely, more like guidance. I added the envelope to my stack and sat again, letting my breath settle. This quiet administrative work was the real turning point. Not the recording, not the betrayal, not even the visit to the lawyer. It was this moment, alone at my kitchen table, closing financial windows my children had used for years without asking whether they had the right. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was the simple act of reclaiming what had always been mine. When evening softened the edges of the room, I placed every prepared folder into a large canvas bag. Tomorrow, I would return to Mr. Bennett to finalize the trust. Tomorrow, the lines of possession would shift permanently. Tonight, the house felt different. Not safer, simply more mine. The kind of quiet that follows a storm not because it passed, but because I finally stepped out of its way. Laura arrived the next morning without calling ahead. She never called first, not because she was spontaneous, but because she assumed I would always be here, always available, always open like a shop with a broken lock. I heard her heels on the walkway before she reached the door. Sharp, hurried steps, impatient even with the pavement. When I opened the door, she swept inside with that familiar blend of perfume and entitlement. "Mom," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You look pale. Are you eating? You haven't been answering your phone." I had answered every necessary call. Hers simply wasn't one of them. "I'm fine," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." She glanced around the house the way people do when they're searching for evidence of neglect, of weakness, of anything that might support their narrative. Her eyes paused on the folders stacked neatly on the table. "What's all this?" she asked, already reaching for one. "Leave them," I said gently. "They're mine." She froze, just a flicker, then smiled in that practiced way she used when she wanted something. "Of course. I just worry, Mom. You really shouldn't handle complex paperwork on your own. You know how overwhelming it gets for you." "For you?" The emphasis was quiet, but unmistakable. "I manage," I said. She sat across from me, smoothing her skirt. "Daniel said you were acting strange yesterday. He thinks you might be stressed or confused." I folded my hands on the table. "Confused about what?" She hesitated, studying me carefully. "About your finances. About the house. About everything that needs to be arranged as you get older." There it was, not even wrapped in soft language this time. "Laura," I said, "I'm not confused." But she pressed on with the soft tone of a woman who believed her gentleness made her manipulations invisible. "I know it's overwhelming, Mom. Aging is complicated. And you've been so generous all these years, helping me with the studio, helping Daniel with his business. Honestly, I don't know how you kept track of everything. That's why I think it's best if you let us manage things now." "Manage," I repeated quietly. She smiled. "Just to make life easier for you." "Life easier for me. What an elegant phrase for taking control." I breathed in slowly. The air felt thick, like memories rising to the surface. I thought of every loan she never repaid, every promise she made, every time she said I should trust her judgment. "Laura," I said, "please tell me honestly, why are you here today?" Her smile wavered. "To help, Mom. You know that." I waited. Silence is a tool older women learn to use well. It unsettles those who rely on rehearsed lines. Finally, she sighed. "Daniel said you were hesitating about signing some forms. He thinks something spooked you, so I came to reassure you." "I don't need reassurance," I said softly. "I need honesty." She blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, feeling my voice steady as stone, "that I know you and your brother have been discussing my affairs without me, and I know what you intend." For a moment she looked stunned. Then her expression shifted, quickly, expertly, into wounded innocence. "Mom, how can you think something like that?" she whispered. "We're your children. We only want what's best for you." She reached across the table, touching my hand. Her fingers were warm, but her grip had the tense urgency of someone trying to claim something slipping away. I didn't pull back. I simply looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth that had been growing for years. "You want what's best for yourselves," I said quietly. She flinched as if struck. "That's not fair." "Maybe not," I said, "but it's accurate." She withdrew her hand slowly, confusion and irritation flickering across her face. Like a child denied a treat she believed already promised. I stood, gathering the folders before she could reach for them again. "I'll handle my own affairs," I said. "Please respect that." She rose too quickly, her chair scraping the floor. "Mom, you're making a mistake. You're pushing us away." I met her eyes, calm as morning light. "No, Laura. I'm simply stepping back into my own life." She stared at me for several long seconds, uncomprehending. Then she picked up her purse, muttering something about stress and stubbornness, and left without looking back. When the door closed, the house fell into soft silence. Not loneliness, just space. Finally, mine again. Jacob showed up that evening without warning, the way only young people can, unburdened by the formality adults layer over every interaction. I heard his knock, softer than Laura's heels, gentler than Daniel's impatience. When I opened the door, he gave me a smile so honest it almost undid me. "Grandma," he said, "can I come in?" He didn't ask out of politeness. He asked because he wanted to make sure I wasn't tired or upset or in the middle of something. Thoughtfulness like that is rare, especially in a world where even family often thinks only of convenience. "Yes," I said. "Come in, sweetheart." He stepped inside and shrugged off his backpack, letting it drop by the door. He never asked where to put it. He just placed it gently in the same spot every time he visited, as if claiming a small corner of the house as his own. I noticed immediately that something was on his mind. He paced toward the kitchen, then hesitated halfway, turning toward me instead. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. "I know you said you were, but I don't know. You seem different lately." "Different?" Yes, a word heavier than he realized. "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just thinking more these days." He nodded slowly, studying my face with a seriousness that didn't match his years. Dad and Aunt Laura were acting weird today. Kinda tense. I thought maybe something happened. I turned away from him to pour tea. Not to hide anything, just to give myself a moment. His concern felt like a warm hand on the back of my ribs, steadying me in a place long hollowed out. They're dealing with their own worries, I said. You don't need to get caught in it. He pulled out a chair and sat down. I'm not caught in anything. I just care. You know that, right? I set a cup before him. His fingers curled around it, and for a moment, he looked like a child again. The boy who used to sit at this very table drawing rockets on napkins, feet not yet touching the floor. Of course I know, I said. You're the one person who visits because he wants to, not because he needs something. He blinked, startled. Is that what Dad does? Comes only when he needs something? The question was too sharp for his age. Not dangerous, just painful. I chose my answer with care. Your father has a lot on his plate, I said. And sometimes he forgets that other people have lives of their own. Jacob looked down at his tea, turning the cup slowly between his palms. Mom says he's stressed. Aunt Laura, too. But sometimes it feels like they make things harder than they need to be. The honesty of youth, simple, clean, unvarnished. He glanced up again. Did they upset you? I met his eyes. They were his grandfather's eyes, steady, gentle, unwilling to look away from truth. They tried, I said, but it didn't work. He smiled faintly, a mix of pride and relief. Good. You're tougher than they think. Tough. I never thought of myself that way. But maybe toughness doesn't always shout. Maybe it whispers, stands steady, refuses to bend even when the wind insists. Jacob talked then about school, about a small scholarship he hoped to win, about a professor who encouraged him. I listened, nodding, offering the kind of small comments that show care more than any grand gesture. His voice warmed the house in a way nothing else had in weeks. When he finished his tea and stood to leave, he hugged me without hesitation. Arms warm, firm, real. Grandma, he said quietly, if you ever need anything at all, just tell me, even if it's not easy. My throat tightened. I touched his cheek lightly. I know, I said, and that means more than you realize. After he left, the house settled around me. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful, like the soft exhale after realizing something true. I wasn't alone in every way that mattered. And tomorrow, the next steps toward reclaiming my life would feel a little less heavy. They came together the next afternoon. Daniel first, tight-jawed and purposeful, and Laura a few steps behind, her arms crossed like a shield. I saw their silhouettes through the frosted glass before they knocked. There's something unmistakable about the posture of people who have already decided what they deserve. I opened the door before they could ring again. Mom, Daniel said, his tone clipped. We need to talk. Of course they did. People who try to control you always need to talk. But what they really mean is, sit down and accept what we've already decided. Come in, I said, stepping aside. They entered like two lawyers preparing for closing statements. No warmth, no pause to take in the room. They walked straight into the kitchen, their battlefield of choice, and sat opposite me without waiting to be offered chairs. Daniel placed a folder on the table. Not the same one as before. Thinner. More urgent. Mom, he began, we're worried. Laura nodded, her expression arranged into a careful mask. You've been acting secretive and scattered. It's unlike you. I folded my hands in my lap. In what way? Daniel leaned forward. You won't sign the documents. You're making changes to your accounts, The bank called me today. The bank should not have called you, I said quietly. That startled him. It flashed across his face, a brief, involuntary crack in his certainty. Well, he said, recovering, they reached out because you've always had me listed as a secondary contact. I've corrected that, I said. Laura's breath hitched, barely audible. She exchanged a look with Daniel, a small, quick, panicked thing. Why would you do that? She asked. We're your children. We're supposed to help you. I met her gaze. Help me do what exactly? Silence. The kind that grows thick, takes shape, and demands honesty none of them were prepared to give. Daniel opened the folder and pushed a set of papers toward me. Mom, this is getting out of hand. We've talked about it. Laura and I both agree you need support managing things now. We can't let you risk making mistakes that could affect all of us. All of us. There it was again. Their truth, dressed as concern. And, he added, we think it's time you let us take over certain responsibilities. Financial ones. Legal ones. Routine things. Routine. The same word he used days earlier. Laura clasped her hands together, overplaying sincerity. We love you. This isn't about control. It's about making sure the future is stable. For the family. The family. Meaning themselves. I looked down at the papers. Even without reading them closely, I recognized the structure. Authority transfers, access permissions, durable power of attorney. Loopholes large enough for them to walk through carrying everything I owned. Did you bring these for me to sign today? I asked softly. Daniel exhaled, frustrated. Yes. It shouldn't be complicated, Mom. We don't want to argue. But we can't keep doing this song and dance. It's time to be practical. Practical. Such a clean word. Such a dangerous one. I slid the papers back across the table. I won't be signing anything. Laura stiffened. Daniel's jaw set. The tension rose like steam from a boiling pot. Mom, he said, his voice tightening, don't do this. You're being unreasonable. No, I replied, my tone steady as a winter branch. I'm being aware. Laura's composure cracked. Do you even understand how much responsibility you're putting on us? How stressful this is? I looked at her gently, truly gently. You seem stressed because you're not getting what you expected. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Daniel stood abruptly, the chair scraping backward. Fine. If you want to be stubborn, we can't stop you. But don't blame us when things fall apart. I rose too, slowly, carefully, but without the slightest tremor. I've managed my life for 78 years, I said. I think I can manage whatever comes next. They didn't answer. They simply gathered their folders, their indignation, their wounded self-righteousness, and walked out. When the door closed, the house felt lighter. Not safer. Just honest. Finally honest. That night, after Daniel and Laura left with their indignation bundled tightly around them, the house felt too still. Not empty, still. As if every room were holding its breath, watching me, waiting to see whether I would crumble or rise. I didn't crumble. But I did sit down on the edge of my bed and allow myself something I had resisted for years. A moment of quiet breaking. It wasn't dramatic. No sobbing into my hands, no shaking shoulders. Just a slow, warm stream of tears sliding down my cheeks, the kind that come only when a truth has finally settled somewhere deep and refuses to be pushed away anymore. I didn't even bother to wipe them. Tears aren't shameful at my age. They are simply the body's way of emptying out whatever has been carried too long. I cried for the children I once had. Kind, uncertain, eager to please. I cried for the mother I used to be, the one who believed that giving endlessly was the same as loving. I cried for the years I spent smoothing things over, cushioning their disappointments, softening their lives with pieces of mine. Mostly, I cried because I finally understood something I had not wanted to admit. They loved the idea of me, not the woman I am. The idea of a mother who would always sign, always agree, always stay quiet. When the tears finally stopped, I sat very still, feeling an unfamiliar calm spread through me, the way a winter evening settles after snowfall. Soft, cool, but peaceful. Crying didn't weaken me. It emptied the space I needed for clarity. I rose and went to the mirror. My reflection looked the same as always. Silver hair pinned neatly, lines around the mouth softened by time, eyes dark and steady. But something beneath the surface had changed. I recognized myself again. A woman who had lived a whole life, not a shadow waiting to be written over by others. Sometimes the deepest strength hides behind the simplest gestures. Boiling water for tea, smoothing a pillow, folding a sweater with careful hands. I did all of these as the evening grew quieter. My movements were slow but intentional, grounding me in the present moment. Around 9 o'clock, I opened the window to let in the cool air. Outside, the streetlights glowed faintly, casting long shapes across the pavement. I listened to the familiar creaks of my house, old wood settling, pipes sighing, the gentle hum of the heater. Sounds I used to interpret as loneliness now felt like companionship. This house had held me through grief, celebration, seasons of fear and hope. It knew me better than my children did, and tonight, it felt like it was standing with me. I returned to the kitchen and looked at the folders still stacked neatly by the telephone. Tomorrow, Mr. Bennett would finalize everything: the trust, the transfers, the protections, the legal boundaries no one could cross. My life, the part still within my power, would be secured. But tonight wasn't for planning. Tonight was for understanding. I sat in the armchair, pulled the quilt over my legs, and closed my eyes. Not pretending this time, just resting, letting my breath settle into its natural rhythm, letting the truth of the last several days sink into my bones without resistance. I wasn't losing my family. I was simply seeing them clearly. There is a difference, and recognizing that difference didn't feel like defeat. It felt like stepping into a long-awaited honesty, quiet, steady, and mine alone. By morning, the heaviness that had followed me for days felt quieter, as though it had finally settled into a place where it could no longer reach my throat. I moved slowly, but not from weakness. My steps had purpose now, each one anchored by a decision I had spent years avoiding. I made tea, buttered a slice of toast, and sat for a moment in the kitchen's soft morning light. The house felt almost alert, listening as though it knew what today meant. On the table lay the folders I had prepared, everything organized neatly, in the way my husband once taught me. If you understand your papers, you understand your life. For the first time in a long while, I felt that understanding returning. I dressed with care. Nothing grand, just my navy cardigan, the one that made me feel composed. I buttoned it slowly, smoothing the fabric over my ribs. It's strange how small acts take on meaning when your life shifts. A cardigan becomes armor. A folder becomes a shield. The taxi arrived on time. I stepped outside with my bag held close, the crisp air brushing my face. The driver helped me into the back seat, and we rode in silence. I watched the neighborhoods pass, children waiting for school buses, a couple walking their dog, teenagers half awake on bicycles. Life going on, unaware of the quiet battles fought inside other people's homes. Mr. Bennett greeted me with a nod that conveyed both respect and concern. He motioned me into the same office as before, and I took my seat without hesitation. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. He spread the documents across the desk in a methodical line. Trust papers, updated directives, property protections, revocation forms. Each sheet represented a barrier, a wall built carefully between my autonomy and the hands that had tried to close around it. "We'll start with the trust," he said. "Your home will be placed in it immediately. No one, not Daniel, not Laura, can contest it without a court challenge, and given your capacity, they will not succeed." Capacity. A clinical word, but today it felt like a victory. The simple recognition that I was still fully myself. He walked me through every section with patience, letting me breathe between explanations. I read every paragraph, letting the meaning sink into me slowly, like sunlight warming an old stone. When I signed the first document, my hand didn't tremble. It moved with the steadiness of a woman reclaiming pieces of herself she hadn't realized she'd given away. One signature after another, quiet strokes of ink, deliberate, final. Next came the financial protections, removing all points of access, redirecting everything through the trust, and assigning Jacob as future beneficiary. "He doesn't need to know any of this yet," I said. "He's too young to carry that responsibility." "And he won't," Mr. Bennett replied. "Not until long after these decisions protect you." We continued, document after document, until the last signature dried beneath my pen. When it was done, the desk felt lighter, and so did I. Mr. Bennett leaned back, studying me. "How do you feel?" I considered the question, not triumphant, not vindictive. Those feelings belonged to people who sought battles. I sought peace. "I feel," I said slowly, "as though I've finally stepped into my own life, instead of letting other people make room for themselves in it." He smiled, gently, respectfully, and closed the folder. Outside, the afternoon sun had brightened the street. The wind was cool, but not harsh. As I walked toward the taxi, my bag tucked under my arm, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not the kind given by others. The kind built by my own hands. When I reached home, the house greeted me with its familiar creaks. I set my bag on the table, took a deep breath, and allowed a small, quiet smile. The important work was done, and the rest, the reckoning, the truth, would come in its own time. I didn't ask my children to come. I didn't call or hint or suggest. I simply sent a message to our family group chat, the same one they used to arrange holidays, without including me. "Come by tomorrow afternoon. I have something to discuss." Just one sentence. No explanations. They arrived tense, suspicious, bracing for confrontation. Guilty people always do. Daniel came in first, shoulders squared as if preparing for a negotiation. Laura followed, clutching her purse tight, avoiding my eyes at first. They both paused when they saw Jacob sitting at the table, sipping tea. "You invited him?" Daniel asked sharply. "I invited everyone," I said. Jacob set his cup down gently. "Dad, I can leave if you want." "No," I said, and my voice was steady enough to make them all look at me. "You're here because you care. That's reason enough." I didn't ask anyone to sit. I simply walked to the sideboard drawer, opened it, and took out the recorder. The same one they'd ignored while they whispered over my supposed sleep. I placed it on the table. Daniel's face changed instantly. First confusion, then recognition, then alarm so sharp it flickered across him like a shadow. Laura swallowed hard, her throat moving visibly. "What's that?" she asked, but she already knew. I pressed the button. The room filled with the sounds of that night. The door opening, their hushed voices, the rustle of documents. Courtney's laugh, sharp as broken glass, Daniel's calm, calculated tone. Their words, every one of them, spilled into the kitchen with unforgiving clarity. Jacob stared at the table, jaw clenched. Laura pressed a hand to her mouth. Daniel went pale. "Turn it off," he snapped. "I will," I said quietly, "after it finishes." They shifted in their chairs, unable to look at me, unable to stop hearing themselves. "You can't expect her to understand any of this. She's getting older. She signs whatever we give her. She won't need the money much longer. We'll handle everything when the time comes." The recording ended. The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the refrigerator hum, the faint tick of the wall clock, the trembling breath Laura tried to hide. "Mom," Daniel began, voice strained. "That wasn't... You're taking this out of context." I felt something inside me settle, something that had been restless for years. "I'm not taking anything," I said calmly. "These were your words, your intentions, spoken in my home." "It was just talk," he said. "You misunderstood." I looked at him, truly looked. I was awake. He flinched. Laura lowered her hand from her mouth. "Mom, we just wanted to protect you." "By dividing my money?" I asked softly. "By planning to take my house? By speaking of my death as if it were a scheduling inconvenience?" She didn't answer. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't the kind born of remorse, more the shock of being seen clearly for the first time. Daniel stood, pacing. "Fine. We handled it badly. But you needed help. You do need help." "I needed respect," I said, "and honesty. And neither of you gave me that." Jacob looked up suddenly, eyes bright with anger he was trying hard to contain. "Dad? How could you?" Daniel's breath caught. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally sat again, defeated by something he couldn't argue with. His own voice played back to him. I picked up the folders from the counter and placed them on the table. "These are the updated documents," I said. "The trust is established. The house is protected. All access to my accounts has been revoked. And you," I looked from one to the other, "no longer have any authority over my affairs." Laura gasped softly. You actually did it." "Yes," I said simply. Daniel stared at me, something like fear flickering across his expression. Not of losing my money, but of losing the version of me he had depended on. "Mom," he whispered, "you didn't have to go this far." "I did," I replied, "because you went much farther." No shouting followed, no storm, no dramatic exit. Just three people facing a truth they thought an old woman would never uncover, and one old woman who finally stopped pretending not to see. For a long moment after my words settled, no one spoke. The air in the room felt dense, as if every molecule had stopped moving, listening for what might follow. But nothing followed. I wasn't interested in speeches, apologies, or explanations. I had spent a lifetime absorbing those. Today was for clarity, not comfort. Daniel was the first to find his voice. "So that's it?" he asked quietly, though there was a tremor behind his calm. "You're just cutting us out?" I considered his question. "No," I said. "I'm not cutting you out. I'm drawing a boundary you never expected me to have." He stared at the folders as if they were weapons. Maybe to him they were. Papers that ended a kind of quiet authority he had been building for years, convinced I didn't notice, or didn't mind, or couldn't stop him. "You don't trust us," Laura whispered. Her voice sounded small, not like a child's, but like someone who'd just realized the room she thought she controlled belonged to someone else. She touched the back of a chair for balance. "I trusted you both longer than was wise," I said gently. Laura lifted her gaze. "We're your children." "Yes," I replied. "And that's why this hurts." But being someone's child doesn't grant ownership of their life. Daniel pressed his palms against the table. "Mom, listen. You're making permanent decisions, legal ones. You should think—" "I have thought," I said, "longer than you know." He exhaled sharply, looking around the kitchen as if searching for something familiar to anchor himself. But everything here belonged to me. Every photograph, every chipped cup, every line of worn tile. And for the first time, he seemed to recognize it. Laura sank into a chair. Her mascara smudged, but she didn't bother wiping it. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. "Are we just spectators in your life?" I sat down opposite her. "You're my children. You may visit. You may call. You may be part of my days if you choose to come without demands or expectations. But you will not manage my home, my finances, or my decisions. That part of your involvement is over." Daniel rubbed a hand across his face, frustration and something like grief battling beneath his skin. "I was trying to help you." "By planning my death?" I asked. He winced. "That wasn't—" "You're twisting it." "No," I said. "I'm repeating it." He had no answer for that. Jacob cleared his throat, the only calm presence among us. "Grandma's not alone," he said quietly. "She's capable, and she's allowed to protect herself." Laura turned to him, startled by the gentle firmness in his voice. "Jacob, this isn't your place." He met her eyes. "Maybe not, but I'd like to believe in a family that cares more about the person than the inheritance." Her mouth opened, then closed again. Daniel stood abruptly. "Fine," he said. "You've made your point. We won't sign anything, we won't push. But don't expect us to sit here and pretend this is normal." "I don't expect anything," I said. "Expectation is what led us here." He gathered his coat, movement stiff. Laura rose slower, as if her legs resisted the truth she stood in. They walked to the door without ceremony. No hugs, no reassurances, no final stabs disguised as concern. Before stepping outside, Laura paused. "Mom, if you ever need anything—" "I'll ask," I said. "If I need anything." She nodded, a small, uncertain motion, then followed her brother out. When the door closed, I didn't collapse. I didn't tremble. I didn't feel triumphant. I simply breathed. The house felt different, not fragile, but settled. Everything loose had been gathered. Everything hidden had been named. Everything threatened had been protected. I walked to the kitchen table, touched the folder edges lightly, and felt a quiet certainty move through me. I had done exactly what needed to be done, not out of revenge, out of respect, for the life I still had, and the woman I still was. After Daniel and Laura left, the house fell into a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. Not empty, not abandoned, simply cleared, as though someone had swept out all the stale air I'd been breathing for years and opened a window to something honest. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, letting the quiet settle around me. I didn't feel victorious. Victory belongs to people who fight battles loudly. What I felt was steadier, deeper, something that rose from the quiet folds of my years. I felt intact. Intactness is an underrated triumph. I brewed a fresh pot of tea, the steam curling gently like threads of thought. I took my cup to the living room and sat in the armchair where everything had begun. The same place where I'd pretended to sleep while my children divided my life. The quilt lay over the arm just as it had that night, soft and worn from a lifetime of use. I pulled it across my lap. The house breathed with me, wood settling, pipes humming, wind brushing the windows. Familiar sounds. Loyal sounds. Sounds that had never once lied to me or asked for what wasn't theirs. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from exhaustion. No, I wasn't tired. I felt more awake than I had in years. Awake in the way a person becomes when she finally stops walking with her head bowed and instead lifts her gaze to see the path as it is, not as she'd hoped it might be. The past week ran through me in slow, steady pieces. The recorder, the whispers, the lawyer's firm patience, Jacob's kindness, the tears I'd allowed myself, the signatures that returned my life to my own hands, and finally, the reckoning in my kitchen. My children hearing their own voices as if for the first time. They had not apologized. I hadn't expected them to. Remorse requires humility, and humility was something neither of them had practiced in a long time. But something had shifted in them. I saw it in the way Daniel's shoulders lowered when he realized he no longer had a claim on my decisions. I saw it in the way Laura hesitated at the door, uncertainty flickering through her practiced composure. Something had cracked, not necessarily for my sake, but perhaps for their own. Sometimes truth plants seeds in the dark that take years to sprout. Maybe this was one of those seeds. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring its warmth. Age teaches you to appreciate warmth wherever you find it. In a cup, in a quiet room, in the steady knowledge that you have protected yourself without becoming hard. Strength doesn't need sharp edges. Sometimes it is found in gentleness that no longer bends. The sun shifted across the floor, lighting the stack of papers on the coffee table. My trust documents, my directives, the legal confirmations of the life I had reclaimed. For a moment, I touched the top page with the tip of my finger, grateful not for what I owned, but for the simple fact that it was mine. My phone chimed. A message from Jacob. "Just checking on you. Love you." I smiled, small and real. Not everything had been lost. Not every bond had frayed. Life rarely hands you perfection, but sometimes it hands you one person who reminds you that love can still be clean. I typed back, "I'm all right, dear. Love you too." Then I set the phone aside and breathed in the late afternoon quiet. This was my life. Not the version others wanted to mold, not the diminished shadow they expected me to slip into, but the one I had chosen, steadily, decisively, in the full light of day. People think old age means shrinking, but the truth is simpler. Old age means choosing what matters and setting down what does not. And I, Helen Marwick, 78 years old, still steady in my chair, had finally chosen myself. I looked toward the window where the branches swayed in the breeze and felt the soft, grounded certainty of someone who has survived more than anyone realized. I am still here. I am still whole. And that is enough. If you have a story of your own, one you've held quietly, one that deserves to be heard, share it. Your voice matters more than you think.